The Trump presidency is already over, and Washington knows it. When authority survives, but persuasion does not, what if a presidency could end, without the president leaving office? No resignation, no election defeat, no constitutional crisis, just something quieter. The country stops listening. Some analysts now believe that may already be happening to Donald Trump. In constitutional theory, presidencies end at noon on January 20th. In political reality, they often end much earlier, and sometimes much later. The dangerous category is the presidency that ends symbolically while continuing institutionally, still issuing orders, still commanding agencies, still speaking from the podium, but no longer shaping the national imagination. That is the condition political scientist John Kenneth White recently described in The Hill with unusual bluntness. In his judgment, the presidency of Donald Trump is already over, not legally, not electorally, not procedurally, psychologically, and in modern American politics, psychology is where presidencies live. The arithmetic problem: every administration eventually collides with statistics. The lucky ones collide late. The unlucky ones collide early. The unlucky and confident ones collide publicly. Trump's claim that prices are plummeting downward at the State of the Union address did not merely sound optimistic. It sounded incompatible with experience. And experience, unlike messaging, updates itself hourly at the supermarket checkout counter. Economic perception is the most unforgiving metric in democratic leadership. It is not mediated by think tank reports or cable news commentary. It is mediated by gasoline pumps. Roadside price boards are America's most efficient opposition party. White's argument rests on a simple observation: when official narratives diverge too visibly from lived reality, voters do not reconsider reality. They reconsider leadership. This is not ideological rebellion. It is cognitive housekeeping. The independent voter collapse. If rhetoric weakens presidencies, numbers finish them. The analysis presented by Harry Enton of CNN provides the statistical backbone to White's claim. In October 2024, Americans were still divided over whether Trump's economic stewardship helped or hurt them personally. Today they are not. A majority now say they are worse off. A small minority say they are better off. Among independents, the electorate's weathervane rather than its anchor, the imbalance becomes dramatic. Presidents can survive hostility from opponents, they rarely survive indifference from independents. The latter is not anger. It is withdrawal. And withdrawal is harder to reverse than outrage because it contains no energy to redirect. Once swing voters stop arguing with a presidency, they have already moved beyond it. The illusion of narrative control. Modern administrations do not merely govern policy. They govern attention. Agenda setting is half the presidency. Traditionally, when one controversy threatens momentum, another replaces it. Washington calls this strategy changing the subject. Voters call it Tuesday. But there is a saturation threshold beyond which controversy ceases to rotate and begins to accumulate: rising fuel costs, rising grocery prices, masked immigration enforcement optics, the lingering shadow of the Epstein files, and the widening conflict involving Iran. These are not successive distractions. They are concurrent ones. White's argument is not that the administration faces too many scandals. It is that it faces too many simultaneously survivable scandals, non-fatal individually, but collectively exhausting. The result is not outrage fatigue, it is credibility fatigue. Governing without consent, White invokes Abraham Lincoln with deliberate precision: public sentiment is everything. Lincoln understood something frequently forgotten in executive politics: democratic authority is not mechanical. It is relational. Presidents retain legal authority regardless of approval ratings. But their ability to define national direction depends on persuasion rather than statute. When persuasion disappears, policy continues but leadership stops. This is the difference between governing a country and administering one. The former requires legitimacy. The latter requires paperwork. The historical pattern of symbolic endings. American history contains precedents for presidencies that expired politically before they expired constitutionally. They share three characteristics. First, economic pessimism becomes personal rather than abstract. Second, Independents disengage rather than polarize. Third, controversies accumulate instead of replacing each other. At that point, the presidency becomes reactive rather than directive. It answers events rather than shaping them. White's claim is that Trump's administration has crossed this threshold. The presidency still speaks, the electorate has begun listening elsewhere. The foreign policy temptation, there is, however, a traditional escape route from domestic decline. Foreign crisis, wars compress attention. They reorder priorities. They elevate commanders-in-chief above legislators and commentators alike. They also carry risk. If voters interpret conflict as necessity, presidents gain authority. If they interpret it as diversion, presidents lose it faster. The emerging confrontation with Iran therefore presents a paradox. It offers strategic clarity abroad while threatening political clarity at home. Military engagement can stabilize presidencies, or confirm suspicions that they are drifting. Much depends on whether voters see purpose or escalation. The Epstein variable, some controversies fade. Others linger in political memory as unresolved background noise. The Epstein files belong to the latter category. They resist closure because they resist narrative finality. They generate questions faster than answers and associations faster than conclusions. Presidencies do not require innocence to survive such controversies. They require distance from them. Distance, however, is difficult to maintain in an environment where media cycles operate continuously rather than sequentially. The scandal does not dominate the agenda, it shadows it, and shadows lengthen when leadership weakens. The ICE optics problem, domestic enforcement imagery has historically strengthened Republican administrations. Law and order visuals reassure core supporters and signal decisiveness to wavering ones. Masked enforcement patrols, however, introduce ambiguity. They signal strength to some voters and unease to others. In a stable presidency, such imagery consolidates authority. In a fragile one, it suggests improvisation. Perception is dependent on context. Authority is timing dependent. Optics rarely travel alone. The economics of disbelief, the most damaging feature of current polling, is not declining approval. It is declining credibility. Approval fluctuates. Credibility compounds. When voters conclude that economic messaging diverges from their experience, they stop evaluating policy claims individually. They begin discounting them collectively. This produces a subtle but decisive shift. Instead of asking whether conditions are improving, voters ask whether leadership understands conditions at all. The second question is harder to answer convincingly, and once it dominates political judgment, recovery windows narrow sharply. The presidency as performance. Modern American presidents operate in two arenas simultaneously. They govern institutions, they perform reassurance. The first is procedural. The second is psychological. Losing one weakens the other. Trump's political strength has always rested on narrative velocity, the ability to define events before critics interpret them. That velocity appears to have slowed. When presidencies lose narrative initiative, they begin reacting to coverage instead of shaping it. This is rarely reversible, because narrative initiative depends not on volume, but on credibility. The independent electorate's quiet verdict. Enton's polling numbers matter less for what they show than for whom they represent. Independents do not form movements. They form margins. They rarely protest loudly. They simply stop agreeing quietly. And elections in modern America are decided not by enthusiasm gaps but by expectation gaps, by whether voters believe tomorrow will resemble yesterday or something else entirely. When independents begin concluding that neither improvement nor change is forthcoming, presidencies enter maintenance mode. Maintenance mode is survivable, it is not influential. The presidency that continues anyway. White's most controversial claim is also his most precise. Trump retains the powers of the presidency. He has lost the sentiment that animates them. This creates a paradoxical condition familiar to political historians. A presidency that functions administratively while fading narratively. Such presidencies do not collapse dramatically. They recede gradually. They sign legislation, issue executive orders, conduct diplomacy, but they stop defining the national storyline. In a media-driven republic, storyline is strategy. Without it, governance continues, but leadership pauses. The transition before the transition. American politics prefers clean endings. Elections supply them. Transfers of power formalize them. Inaugurations dramatize them. Symbolic endings, however, rarely announce themselves so politely. They emerge through polling trends, narrative shifts, and subtle changes in how voters interpret presidential speech. White's argument is not that Trump will leave office soon, it is that voters may already be preparing to leave him behind. Which raises the unsettling possibility that the United States is entering one of its periodic but consequential interludes, a presidency still exercising authority, but no longer setting direction, still commanding institutions, but no longer commanding belief. History has encountered this configuration before, it usually recognizes it only afterwards. Presidencies don't always end with elections, sometimes they end when the country starts looking past them, and that moment may already have arrived.